I definitely been thinking a lot about coaching this week after looking at your website and thinking about it as a kid who played football and had some of the most incredible adults in my life who were amazing people. And I remember in grade 8, this guy just F-wording us the entire time and making us sprint so hard because we didn't care and we didn't do this. And it was such a split between these people who changed my life positively and these people who scared the living hell out of me. Mm-hmm. And so looking at your website was really interesting to think about how you could approach doing coaching in different ways.
Well, first of all, I want to thank both of you for inviting me onto the podcast. For 15 years, I was a instructor in child interviewing. I'm a police officer, and I was teaching police and social workers how to interview kids when bad things have happened in their life.
Yeah.
Of course, in the criminal justice system, we have to make sure that we're getting the reliable evidence, and there's a science behind asking questions and communication in general. And I'm also a parent. I have 3 kids, and they've always been involved in a bunch of different sports. I always kind of knew that your average coach on your soccer field or football or whatever is usually a parent. And they might have been an expert in their sport, but they probably don't have any communication skills specifically related to teaching young people. So I'm at Brayfoot Park. My youngest son, Callan, is the referee. And I'm watching a coach yell at probably an 8 or 9-year-old.
Jeez.
Square to the ball. Square to the ball, square to the ball. Full disclosure, I'm not a soccer player, so I don't understand all the technical components. I have no idea what square to the ball means, and there's zero chance this kid will know what that means. And the coach, progressively, he's getting louder. He actually self-corrected himself at some point, which I thought was really neat. And then he said, stand in front of the player, and you're in front of the ball. And so he took that square, which is an abstract term, and he made it more concrete by saying, stand in front of the ball. The kid then did that, and the yelling ceased. And
it's interesting that focus on being concrete, because I wonder if that's part of like interviewing kids in the other context you were talking about as an interviewer, like being direct and knowing exactly, using plain language.
I mean, research is really clear. The words that you choose to formulate your questions with young people, you have to be concrete and generally concise. Young people don't understand abstract words, right? Abstract words are things that we can't see, feel, touch, or hear. Say being square to the ball is nothing that 8-year-olds can actually touch or feel. Another great one, in lacrosse, you'll hear a coach yelling pick and roll. It's a term, it's a sport-specific jargon, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you know the sport and you're adult, you know what a pick and roll is. You might know basketball, so you understand it. And you're delivering that to a young child who doesn't have the world experience, the knowledge. Pick and roll doesn't actually make sense. And so then you have to use words like, what I want you to do is run up to that player. I want you to put your stick on their shoulder or their arm. And then I want you to push, and I want you to turn and run towards the goal. And so just by breaking that down, the child's now going to understand exactly what you want. And so, go ahead, Brent.
I mean, what you're getting at comes back to what we talked about in one of our previous podcasts of common language descriptions of don't create unnecessary jargon, and don't use 10 words if you can use 5. You can see it in talking to my own kids, but I coached the kids' sports for 8 years. You can see, particularly with boys too, that after the first sentence, they've tuned out. So you have to be very specific and meaningful, like go do this thing and then see what happens.
Right. Yeah. And although Coach Talk training is focused on teaching coaches how to communicate successfully with youth athletes, this communication piece is to everywhere in the world, right? So if Brent is speaking to a client and the question's too long or it's too convoluted, it's not going to make sense to them, or the language is, as you said, Brent, too medical or too jargonish that they don't get what's going on. You got to break it down into smaller pieces. I always will say to my kids things like, hey, I don't actually understand what you're saying. use more descriptive language of
Yeah.
what you want. And so we're sitting at the kitchen table and I said something and Callan turned it back on me and said, it'd be really helpful if you use more descriptive language so I understand what you're saying. I was like, touche.
Yeah.
You've got
Yeah.
me again, kid.
What was
But
your bias? What was if you can tell us, what was the word that didn't land for him?
to be honest, I don't even remember the context. I remember the throwback that he put it back in my lap. So I don't actually know what it was,
Yeah.
but it was just
You know,
like, okay, he knows what's going on. He's very
yeah.
good actually at being a clear and descriptive communicator.
Where would you see the overlap between what you were teaching police officers in terms of how to talk to kids that have had some trauma and what you're teaching coaches? Is it primarily the simplicity and directness of it?
Trauma is a whole new level that you're adding into how do you ask questions or how do you elicit the information from a person who's experienced trauma. So kids under the age of about 11 or 12 are unable to take the perspective from up above, the bird's eye view looking down. And Matt, you probably know this from some of your work with students, that
Definitely.
they are very good at field perspective. So that's looking through your eyes out at the world. Well, what do you see all the time out on the sports field when a coach is trying to demonstrate a drill or a skill? They have a sports board in their hand
Yeah.
or they have balls on the ground kind of mimicking where people are. One of the things that I try and teach people is, look, younger kids, you are wasting your time by holding a sports board and doing all these drawings to maybe demonstrate a drill or a practice skill. You need to actually put the body in the physical space.
What
And then
age do you think that changes at where they can actually utilize that?
it's around 10 to 12, somewhere in there. Then if you ever want to see a younger person fail at this experiment, and this is why you don't do it with young kids in a forensic setting, ask them sitting in the living room to draw their bedroom from a bird's eye view.
Mm.
They will get a percentage correct for sure. They'll know the walls, they'll get those sort of things. They will likely put whereas you and I would draw the top of the shelf or a dresser, they will stack it down and they'll draw like 4 drawers. So you're looking. And when I did this with one of my kids, they put the dog crate. The dog crate was in the bedroom, but they actually stacked the dog crate in front of the bathroom door, the ensuite door. So I'm not saying that they're going to get it like massively wrong, 100% inaccuracy, but they won't get the whole piece.
Just stages.
Just stages. Yeah.
And
Thank
just
you.
like
That's it.
being appropriate for the stage that you happen to be at.
Right. And knowing what you're trying to do. The other really interesting thing with kids, often they won't tell you when they don't know or they're wrong or they don't understand. They'll just sort of nod their head. I can't tell you how many times I've sat on the sidelines as a parent and watched a coach demo or talk about a drill. They go up for the first one, it falls apart, and then they get thrown into sprints because they screwed the drill up.
Right.
It's probably not actually the athlete's fault. It's probably the coach's fault. But if you don't understand the research, you don't understand how to teach, you're going to think that it's just a bunch of kids that aren't paying attention. And so do some lines and they'll be better.
It's an interesting challenge. Like I see how breaking down the skill into concrete components makes a lot of sense. Topic that comes up for me all the time is motivation. And I know it does for Brent because he talks a lot about whether his clients are ready for the learning. And I'm thinking about all the times that what a coach wanted to communicate to us, which was usually aggressive, was something along the lines of like, you are not trying hard enough and you're not willing to sacrifice enough.
Right.
And I wonder if you think, A, is that even a valid message? And if it is a valid message, what does it look to communicate that? What does that pep talk look like when it's not all abstract? Like when it's not a skill, but it's actually the vibe you're bringing isn't there.
Yeah. Well, and you've just used a word that's a great example for all of this, right? Work hard, hustle,
right,
100% effort. Like what do those actually mean?
Yeah.
I have a good one from softball recently. A coach was trying to communicate that this elite team only had 90 minutes of practice. And so what the coach wanted was for players to run from the infield to the outfield and into the dugout between transitions really quickly. And the language that he was using was everyone has to hustle, but never actually communicated what hustle means or the intention behind hustle. And so he was dealing with 15-year-old girls who probably really enjoyed the social aspect of practice and were walking slowly between all these stages. And the coach was frustrated that I said, so have you ever actually outlined what hustle means to these young people? Well, no. I told them we got, 90 minutes, but there's no connection. And the fallacy for adults is thinking that kids have the same level of connection to words and meaning. And so that's sort of a place that you have to define that word you're going to use if it's not concrete or descriptive. And hustle is very abstract. So once you define it and go, hey, girls, hustle means this. We have this amount of time. I want people at 3 different stations, and I want to see this move quickly between stations so we can maximize our practice time. And then you yell hustle. Now everyone has understanding and meaning.
You're getting at a core psychological thing that Brent and I talked about a bit, but I don't know if I really got into it, which is that a lot of times for math education, you're going to start with the concept name. And sometimes this is called Socratic learning because it finds its history in the old Greeks. And you're going to start with the name and you're going to say, this is an abstract process that lets you factor a polynomial. And these are words that are fundamentally meaningless to the person listening to them. So there's no chance that you've created an actual memory hook. Because what a word does, it triggers a network in our brain that has all the things associated with that. So when you start with the label and you have nothing meaty on it, there's nothing for your brain to associate. But on the flip side, when you create an experience for a person of what it means to hustle and you say, that's what I mean by hustle, and you've used all the words to create that physical experience and then you label it, that is how labeling in the brain works. That you have now a network activation pattern to put the label on.
So I think with sports too, and it does come down to a motivation piece as well. The ones that are really aggressive are the ones that do well to start with. The ones that are willing to, that are innately I'm going to go get that ball is mine, which is not really something you can teach to them. It's kind of initially either in them or it's not. And
except Andy's kind of suggesting to the extent you can define it, perhaps you could.
I think you can to a degree, but teaching them how to do something and there's motivating them how to do something too. And that's different based on the sport. If your sport is football and you inherently need to aggressively go tackle somebody versus a sport that's less inherently aggressive, I think the communication would be different.
Why do youth involve themselves in sports? It's 75 or 80% social, fun, interesting, but that's where the parents have a different ideology of what their kids in sports for and why the kid's actually there. And you see that when you work with elite teams. So as that highly motivated athlete to get the ball goes up in age, we get smaller groups together and then we have elite teams. The B team or the rec league team, those players are there for the good times, the fun, and actually the true sport, more like beer league hockey, right, Matt? When you were saying, talking about polynomials, and I haven't had time to think about this. I don't have an answer. How would you use language better as a teacher in math?
It's a huge question because it depends on what you're teaching. But actually, I think variables are an underrated place to think about math. And a variable is just a symbol that is going to stand for a quantity. So you could say X is the number of minutes I'm going to practice this week.
Right.
And when it comes to things like polynomials, a polynomial is going to end up with something like x squared plus 5x plus 3. And that is such a meaningless thing. And I say, well, what if we just said that x was just some number? What does this actually say then? It says some number times itself. Could we imagine what that's like? So we're going to go from that bird's eye view of the generality of x to so if that was 5, what would we do? We'd times 5 by itself. And you take them through that process in a very human way. In fact, there's a really interesting book called The Math Instinct that argues that basically mathematical reasoning and reasoning about gossip is very similar. There's a lot of tracking of groups and relations of logical rules between groups. So if I have a kid who's really narrative, I am going to get really story focused. And then, like I was saying before, at the end, I'm going to say, so anytime we see something where we're timesing a number by itself, and then we have that number appear over here, that's called a polynomial. And then I'm going to come back and try and re-trigger that network. So if we go network activation label, then every other session, I'm going to be checking, does the label activate the network? When I say that to you, that word, does that have meaning or not? And it honestly could take a couple of years in some cases for it to really land, or sometimes it's 5 minutes. Anyways, I didn't mean to give you too long an answer, but that's kind of how it works, is you have to use the same practical tools and the same basic operations of counting. Is the equivalent of like stand in front of the guy, you know?
I think part of the interesting variables when it comes to coaching and teaching kids ends up being the role that their parents are playing too. But that could be academically as well, like how much pressure their parents putting 100%. On them. And you start to see it as the kids get to around that 10, 12, 13 range where the better athletes is starting to rise, and there is a natural formation of like, hey, we can pull these and tier them off to level 1, 2, 3. It's also the time that the crazy parents start to come out where they think their kid's going to the show. And some of the kids, it's intrinsically motivated from them, but it's more their parents living through their kid. I was coaching one kid in baseball. This kid was amazing in practice. He was the best hitter on the team. And in games, his dad would sit right behind the fence in there, like watching, and kid struck out almost every single time. Until I went back there, I'm like, "You're not allowed to stand there anymore." I'm like, "See that home run fence out there? You got to go stand out there until I invite you back, and then you want to see your kid's batting average go up? You go away."
That's funny. I have to give instructions to parents like that too. I'll tell them, if you mention school when it's not time for a school chat, $20 cash on the spot to your kid. And suddenly the pressure about school goes down.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It affects whether and how they're willing to listen to another adult as well. So you have to look at that in a group setting.
What do you mean by that? Like it might reduce their ability to listen to another adult or increase?
It could go either way. If they're used to being yelled at if they make any mistake, and you take an approach where you're yelling at them to do things, it can be very triggering for them and they shut down.
I think that sometimes parents will undermine the coach's ability because the parent thinks they're smarter or have better tactics or whatever. And then indirectly or maybe unintentionally, they undermine the coach. And then so the kids, no, I'm not going to listen to the coach because my dad tells me I should shoot all the time. I shouldn't pass. I should just shoot. I know in soccer, when my kids were playing, there was a very strict policy that no parents will coach from the sidelines. And so our association had a no coaching policy, and they had a technical director would come over and rip into parents when they were doing it, just say, kind of like what Brent said, like, hey, you're not helping here, so we'll let the coaches do it on the sideline. I've noticed in sports that have plexiglass around them, so hockey, lacrosse, others, versus where there is no plexiglass, there's like a complete change in how parents react and manage it. And my girlfriend's son played volleyball, and you are literally meters from the referee or the umpire, and parents never say anything. They don't yell at the umpire. They might groan or bite their tongue, but there's no commentary. And then you go to lacrosse and hockey and you watch people become absolute orangutans because they have plexiglass between them and said referee that's going to get yelled at.
It's true, although I've seen some pretty wild soccer parents with no plexiglass on the side of a field and have them get kicked out. But my favorite hockey moment was we were playing this team from Cloverdale, and there's a teenage. I hate it when parents yell at referees, like teenage kid referees.
I got screamed at as an umpire at 12, and it traumatized me.
We were playing this team, and this mother from the other team brought one of those really obnoxiously loud, like, air horns, and they scored, and she just let her rip, and it was like one of those ones that has like a drill on it and is really loud. And the ref stopped the game. I was so proud of this kid. The ref stopped the game, pointed at that woman in the crowd, and made her physically leave the building before he would let the game go back on again. It took balls of that kid. It was great.
I think it's a train horn, isn't it? I've seen, like, it's literally off of a train. That's why it's so crazy loud. Callan, my youngest, he was a soccer referee. In one game was getting quite heated, and I was there for the whole day, so I just did the lines for him. Now, the people on the sideline didn't know that it was my child that was reffing because I just looked like a dad doing the sidelines. And I actually turned and said to a parent who was starting to yell at him, I said, "You realize that you're screaming at a 12-year-old, right?" And the look on the parent's face when I called it right in front of them and a group of parents, they just hung their head.
Yeah.
And then at halftime, I called both coaches over. And at this point, I guess the parents realized that's probably the referee's dad. I said to the coaches, you have a 12-year-old referee in this game. Both teams are being way too intense. You coaches are responsible for managing your players, not the 12-year-old. And they
Yeah.
both sort of went back to their sides. And you know what? Callan never reffed after that. He's done. And
Yeah.
so, Matt, you said you're traumatized. And yeah, like how you lose refs, you can't have people yelling at young people at that age, right? It's just
Absolutely.
devastating.
You're kind of getting at with the idea of the boards separating. It's really interesting how anonymity and being separate from the process gives you inappropriate courageousness to be rude.
Yeah.
For many years, I don't know if it's exactly related, whether a parent would work with me would be optional, and they'd have to pay me more to have me work with the parent. But as a result, the parent was always a little bit boxed out, like outside of the rink, and much more in that chirping kind of energy. And so I ended up changing my model and being like, you're paying for it regardless. So you can use it or not. And actually, it's not fully optional, because if you're breaking it, I will call you in and we will talk about it. Interestingly, in addition to giving me times to say, like, hold on, this is too much, bringing them into the process makes them really more sensitive to the entire thing. And so it's interesting how when we box out parents or we try to just keep them on the outside versus having a way of inviting them in, they feel entitled to do whatever they want in a kind of narcissistic way on the outside. And on the inside, they feel like a bit more of a part of something.
The year that I chose to stop coaching baseball was the year that the kids were first allowed to start pitching. Every parent thinks their kid deserves to be a pitcher. It's a very anxiety-provoking thing to be the center of attention. The whole game hinges on you being able to throw a ball over a plate, and your successes and failures are very much on display. There was only a handful of kids that A, had the competency to do it, and B, had the courageousness to also do it. Some of them were terrible at it, but expressed a willingness to want to do it. And others were terrible at it, and their parents hadn't expressed a willingness that they wanted to do it. And in hindsight, if I went back and coached that level again, I would start the season by communicating first with the parents, as opposed to just focusing on the kids, and like put some expectations on their head to both in what they should or shouldn't expect to communicate with their kid, and then allow me to focus on your kids. But that experience of it, I had enough negative experiences that I was like, okay, I think I'm done.
And
Kids too, yeah.
it's interesting, Andy, how you, in that moment, like you use the same technique you were describing earlier of like positioning that person's behavior as shouting at a 12-year-old that is the most practical, non-abstract framing of that behavior. And just like with a kid, it took something that was abstract and meaningless and suddenly became super real and embarrassing and shameful.
Yeah.
So it's like that technique's very powerful.
And the second part is the delivery, right? The parent's a little bit unhinged over a U9 soccer game, and the absolutely calm, stoic lines person says to them and points out in their face how bad it looks.
That is really important when giving feedback, to be able to contain the emotions of the person you're giving the feedback to. And I think that's where kids can get our number, like our own kids, because in some ways our kids can have a direct line to what really, really pisses us off in a way that my clients wouldn't, or maybe your coaching person wouldn't. Because that in attachment theory, it's all about the adult being able to contain and hold the feelings of the other person.
I've been a parent. I've been a manager. I've been a president of a local sports association. I don't coach because, interestingly, even though I know all of these pieces of how I should coach, when my kids run the team, I should go try and coach some other people's kids. I'm very good with them. When my kids run the team, I was not a good coach. Yeah. I would pull my kid off for doing one dumb thing and kind of rag on him for that. Versus other people's kids, I was very, very good at. Calm, there's no emotional attachment, you're able to do it. Brent, I'm going back to the baseball piece, and I'm not a baseball expert, so if I'm wrong on this, someone correct me. But every single play is like, if it's A, then it's B, and if it's B, it's a C. There is set plays for everything. There's a right and a wrong. There's very rarely a dynamic play where you could do like hockey. You could have put the puck in the corner. You could have done a back pass. Both are good options.
That's where I coached baseball all the way from blast ball, which is before T-ball, all the way up through.
Yeah.
And they do add layers of rules on every year because that they're progressively more capable of understanding. But there's all sorts of non-intuitive rules to it.
As a child, the idea of balking
Right.
was
I still don't get what a
so
balk is.
confusing. It's
Yeah.
like, how do you know he had the intention to pitch? And I, as a 9-year-old or whatever, I just could not get my head around that.
I think they had problems at the World Series last year too. That was there.
Oh, really?
There was, yeah, I'm pretty sure there was a balk call that was controversial. But I think there's an added level in the teaching range for the coaches. And like you said, Brent, you signed up and you're a dad and you're a sports guy and you can wrangle kids together. But associations and clubs aren't always giving coaches the skills they need to be the most effective they can. Every sport has a mandatory course you have to take. And I've done those in hockey and lacrosse and others. And that mandatory course focuses on the rules of the game. It focuses on safe sport, of course, to make sure that kids are not, put in a place of abuse. They might tell you some drill progressions, like how to fundamental skills. None of them that I have seen focus on language and how you communicate with those young athletes.
Yeah.
And so the piece that I pitch is that youth athletes will actually enjoy the sport more because you're telling them the sport concept in words they understand. And probably more importantly, you as a coach will get great satisfaction because you see youth athletes thrive in sport. And I tie that back to my soccer example. I don't think that dad on the sideline was actually having the greatest time when he's screaming at a kid. Where you find satisfaction as a coach is when you see kids execute what you want or what you're intending them to do in that chosen sport. And if I had all the time in the world, you could translate this into teaching, school teachers, you could translate it into parenting. It's just the foundation of everything is communication.
It's interesting to think about how fear must impact the coaches wanting to take it. And it's an interesting question of how can you make people feel safe enough to learn this? Because that parent who's yelling or the coach who's yelling, there's a should in their head. I should make sure that kid does, they're trying to do right in their own broken way. And usually in my experience, working with parents who are going through a change where they have to change the way they approach something, there is a lot of fear. Maybe even coming from their own history. I always love to think about resistance, therapeutic resistance, like the institution resists it, the individual coach resists it. I wonder what are some of the ways we can make people feel safe to change. And it's why aren't coaches signing up? Why don't I make it plain language since this is our theme?
Yeah.
Coaches should be signing up for this. This is obviously to their benefit and everyone's benefit. And when I see this in teaching, the reason the parents don't do it is because they're scared of something.
Well, in my experience, it's like the same 10 parents that coach all the sports in the community. I was one of them, and you do enjoy it, but it's people that do come from a fundamentally athletic background that really value sports as a thing and may have played that sport at a high level, but may not have had the experience of actually really working with young kids. So they feel they have all of this sport knowledge to offer. And so a lot of people don't volunteer to do it because they couldn't. Them signing their kid up for a community sport is a means of time management for them as well, where they're being dropped off and they're taken care of for 1 or 2 hours. So I think that's part of what keeps some people away. I don't think it's necessarily they're scared. There's another group of parents
that's
that
interesting, Brent, because I heard that story as, that expert in lacrosse or whatever would be scared. I think in that moment they actually would feel, I'm an expert in lacrosse. The idea that I have so much to learn as a coach is kind of humiliating, especially given the kind of person who becomes really good at sport. And so my suspicion is that they actually, if you said to them, I really think a little work on the non-sport elements of coaching would be good, my prediction is they would have an anxiety flood.
I don't know if they'd be scared or anxious about it as much as frustrated and a bit angry that the kids aren't picking up what they're doing. And then
Well, I
they
would view that
tend-
as a defense reaction to the fear that it's actually you. That is our hypothesis. It's actually the coach that is the problem. It's not the child. It is the coach. And so the reality of the scenario is that person has to go like, I'm mad at you, because that covers up for the fact that if I'm not mad at you, it's on me.
Right.
And I just think it's just those courses, they're helpful, but they end up being another thing to do.
Yeah.
And so that's where a coach that's putting out their time to spend all this time with sporting organizations and teams and like week practices and weekends, and then have to do have another thing to do. And the positioning of it, well, it will make you enjoy this more, make the kids be better at it and enjoy it more, is, I think, very accurate. I'm sure it is challenging to get it embedded into larger level sports organizations because they're all volunteer run as well. And they have I've also become the president of a sports organization unintentionally, because you give an inch and you take a mile.
My dad did too.
Yeah. So like that's a hard nut to crack.
Do you think then there should be professional coaches? Would there be a role? Like, is there a sport where that hurt? I wonder if that happens. I have no idea.
Oh yeah, it happens.
It does at the higher levels when they're at the rep levels, and there's all these academy levels now.
Does it make a difference if the coach is trained in coaching? No.
I don't think so. I think the difference is cash. So as I said, I didn't actually do a lot of coaching, but I was a president of a minor not-for-profit sports association in lacrosse. And I saw the erosion of not-for-profit sports across the board, as Brent alluded to, with your academies. And academies are a money-making adventure, often run by highly qualified sports people. But I would go back to that first piece of that, even though you played in the NHL or MLB or whatever, it doesn't mean you have the communication strategies for teaching youth athletes. Your only checkbox, your only certificate is you played professional, and that meant you were a great athlete. It has zero correlation. Usually the driver behind the academy is the professional athlete who's then transitioning out of, I wouldn't say they're being hired. I would say they are transitioning their skill into a new profit stream and moving down.
A bunch of the academies, I don't know that all of them, but a lot of them are actually registered nonprofits.
Yeah. And probably the biggest concern in all of that from a utilitarian perspective is that as you see academies thrive and do better, and I'm not arguing that they don't provide a great sport experience. They provide a very good parent experience because you pay a lot of money and you don't have to do anything, but you're eroding the ability for all kids to participate in fairly low cost sport in their community because of the proliferation of that.
Interesting question of how do we provide academy level training for people? Like, you can go take a music class and you're not going to be a music star, and you can get good instruction. So maybe there's like almost a market gap where there's not like people who aren't obsessed with the sport.
There was a piece you said earlier about, and it was kind of on that, like, well, if this makes sense, why is every group not doing it? And I'll be totally transparent. I have never shared the concept of coach talk training and how language matters with youth athletes to any person and not heard back. That is amazing, and that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And not many sports organizations are doing it. And so it comes back to that piece of vulnerability and how do you change what you're doing? Because what I see when I do actually teach the course is you are fundamentally changing how people speak, the words they use. And that is not a quick process. It is small incremental pieces. Like, what's one thing you're going to do at the end of this course that's different? And if they can take that one little piece and change it, I call that a success. Because actually changing how you speak in everyday language is a monumental task. So,
and I bet they get the hit of vulnerability. Like, once you are vulnerable and it turns out okay, that is a well-known psychological positive state. So by having that one thing change and that experience doesn't land as shameful or bad, you can make a whole lifetime of growth happen.
Yeah, I try and frame it in a second way. So exactly what you said, that when you practice and you make change, it's not obvious to the world. There's no scorecard that they're ticking like, oh, coach used, descriptive language. So you can actually make a lot of changes without the whole world seeing what's happening in front of you.
How is it that you are pitching implementing it? Is it an online course? Is it an in-person course with you? Is it a one-off thing or something where you have to check back? You said it's an incremental change. Is it something where you
Yeah.
have touch points along a season or?
Yeah.
So I've pitched it in a few different ways. One is I do an in-person workshop, and the second is an online asynchronous course. And the third is one-on-one mentoring or a group mentoring process where I actually come to a sports field or facility or whatever your sports group is and observe and then provide real-time feedback so that they can make real change. In terms of learning, we know that ongoing consistent feedback, peer review is going to be the best. But if you look at the model that we run in the provincial sports associations or at the national level for certification, it's you take this one course. Brent, you alluded to it. It's a drain on my time. I got to go do level one. It's one more barrier to being a coach. If you want to implement this effectively, if a club wanted to, you got to do the training and then you have to have the follow-up mentoring to go with it. But
That's
time,
really interesting.
money. Yeah.
So when I did my master's, there was a push to do self-regulated learning in schools and have teachers learn about self-regulated learning, but they wouldn't sign up to learn it. And so they had this huge problem. And so what they did is they took a small subset of the teachers who volunteered to learn it. And it was non-mandatory. And they would match them with this mentor from the province who was an SRL specialist. And then he would work with them over the year once a week to create their own goals. So he wouldn't come in and tell them. He'd say, like, here's a landscape. Here's some goals, and I'm going to facilitate you working through these goals and talking to each other, with the idea that he could actually like kind of fade his support off, and the working group itself would provide a lot of the development. And it was fascinating. There was a lot of really positive results for teachers.
And that's that mentoring ongoing training versus single shot front end.
But also it's about self-selecting the people who are willing to do a bit more and then trusting that what they learn is going to permeate into the organization rather than trying to have like the least motivated and the most motivated coach in the same room.
Yeah. And for sure, there's those people out there that run minor sports groups that are trying to build the culture of those coaches. And then there's others that just, again, maybe it's financial, maybe it's time, it's putting more on coaches like a demand. So yeah, it's a very interesting process from concept to implementation that you don't always understand what the motivation behind why people make decisions, but
I think there's always a discrepancy between what people will agree is a good idea and what they're actually willing to do. That's what fundamental human nature comes down to.
I love that comment about, people don't sign up to be a coach for 8 years. Generally, they kind of think I can handle one season and I'm out, and then you're now in with that cohort for 5 more years.
It makes me wonder if you should consider advertising some of the non-sports benefits that people get when they take your course, because maybe there'd be benefits. Like if I realize I don't have to coach for 8 years, if I was a clear communicator with my kids, like that benefit hits me right away. Because I did notice on your site, you're really good at pulling out the benefits that would really matter to someone. And I wonder if the non-sports benefits would also be something to consider. Because I'm thinking of a specific guy I know who's a coach who is always into self-improvement. And I actually think this would be intriguing for him. And it would differentiate it from like coaching that is entirely for the purposes of being good at coaching the sport.
Mm-hmm. I ended up with this model because it blended 2 pieces of my life that were so important. I kind of took that language piece from the one side of my work to the sports piece as a parent and watching it. And that's how that came together. And so I never really had an intention to go outside of that, but I know that this could be applicable to a high school teacher. I know this could be applicable to parenting.